Hello, everybody, and welcome to another game design video. And today we're going to talk about targeting characters. We're going to talk about the recent sort of rule that came into 40k 8th edition that's being introduced that protects independent characters. And there's been a lot of call for this rule to come over into Age of Sigmar to stop sort of character sniping and that sort of thing. And I have some fairly strong feelings, opinions about this, but let's start out at the beginning and say, yes, all of this was just my opinion. And I certainly want and welcome your comments and thoughts and other ideas down in the box below. So drop those comments, tell me what you think of the ideas and my arguments, and we'll go from there. All right, so let's get right into it. So what's the problem? Where does this all start? Well, let's take it out of the current situation and go back in time. Characters have always been a sort of iconic part of war games in general, but certainly Warhammer. And they're sort of a cool embodiment of both us, and they're sort of a central figure in the narrative of the battle. Like they're important. They're the people we tend to care more about. From a game rule perspective, they're often pretty powerful pieces on the board too. Even if they're not on a giant monster, they have sort of synergistic abilities, commands. They buff nearby troops, or they themselves are scary in melee or shooting or something like that, right? So they're important in some way. Um, the problem is, as long as sort of characters have been a thing, they've also tended to be susceptible to being killed by massed enemy fire, right? Like, if they're not sitting there, if you have the character standing alone, it's still just one person. Units of shooting things in this game, going all the way back, tend to be able to produce a pretty large number of shots or cannonballs or whatever it happens to be. And so, they can be brought down. And that, of course, means that losing characters is generally the opposite of fun and somewhat unfulfilling narratively. I'm always reminded of, this story of sort of I don't remember the piece of history, but there was a particular prince many years ago in medieval warfare who was sort of set up to become this new, very powerful figure across Europe, and then randomly in a battle, he got his head chopped in half by a Swiss pikeman or something. That's a complete non sequitur, but it's just the point is that like sometimes those heroes do just die and they get cut down. And since the earliest times in the game, there have been rules to sort of stop this from happening. So this was sort of the first incarnation of this rule that I could find. This is before my time, but this is way back. I think in second edition this was introduced, and this is obviously a name that became very well known, and this rule sort of name sort of stuck. But it was "Lookout, Sir," and this was a card you actually played. You had a limited number of cards, and you could play this card to basically prevent a hero from being killed, and instead make some other normal trooper leap in the way of the offending attack. And so there's been a lot. The point is, there's been a lot of rules that have come up over the years. Eventually you could put the characters into units, and then you would have to designate if you were attacking the character or attacking the unit, or sometimes the character couldn't be hit by shots until the whole unit had been killed, or whatever. Even if there was something that could affect them, they could dodge it on a 2-up. Like over time, it just became more and more and more sort of about protecting these characters, that they sort of became sacrosanct. It was almost impossible to kill them if they weren't wandering around alone. And so what ended up happening is, with this sort of expectation that we get to keep our characters as formed, and probably rightly so, but it also meant that we couldn't use characters in a lot of fun ways. Like you couldn't have a character walking around the battlefield individually and sort of doing unique, fun things, getting in fights by himself, for fear of losing him because he didn't have all those layers of protection that had been built up, which mainly relied on being around nearby units. So 40k 8th edition is introducing a rule to protect heroes because, much like Age of Sigmar, it's taking characters out of units. They don't join units anymore, and so the issue is, you're going to get that person last cannoned off the table or something. And so I've got a direct copy paste here of what was spoiled in the community reveal, and it's basically you can't target a character unless they are the closest enemy model. This represents the difficulty in picking out individuals amongst the maelstrom of battle and applies to all characters with a wound characteristic of 10 or less. They specifically mentioned that it includes this guy, who has 9 wounds, and that is him next to a roughly regular-sized Marine. So that dude is being protected. The dude on the left is being protected from being shot at by the dude on the right, which I do enjoy. And then, of course, certain units in 40k will have the sniper ability, letting them bypass this rule so they can pick out characters. And this seems to be the most popular rule people want brought into Age of Sigmar. Like, I've seen a lot of call for this one. It's sort of the one that's kind of risen above. And I get it, because as somebody who I've mentioned on multiple occasions regularly faces an army full of engineer-backed laser cannons, not just actual, they're regular cannons in Age of Sigmar. I just mean they're as accurate as lasers. I certainly have had characters shot down, so I'm not unfamiliar with it, and it's a regular part of my game. The way that I have adjusted to it is by, in my personal meta, taking different tougher characters or characters on monsters, or moving my characters around, putting them out of line of sight, or putting more dangerous threats in my opponent's face very quickly that he has to shoot at, or teleporting over using various shenanigans and killing his cannons. Now, all of these are possibilities. And so the point is, it made me change my tactics. But I do get it. Not every army, not everybody who's playing can do that. That's not always a possibility, and it's unfair to. I'm not in any way wanting to minimize people's expectations, especially if in your meta you have people very aggressively sniping your characters or something. I mean, as I said at the beginning, it's pretty unfun. It's also fairly narratively unrewarding. So I do get it. But I think there's a challenge with this coming into AoS. Let me also say, a game like 40k is a game where your sort of base troops can often be carrying around the equivalent of cannons, right? Like, because of the way weapons mixtures happen and heavy weapons in units, it can mean that, basically every unit, first of all, more or less every unit in a game of 40k has some kind of ranged weapon. That's not always true. There are plenty of exceptions, I know. But there are a lot more ranged weapons in 40k, and you can have whole battles where quite easily where everybody on the table has some kind of gun, and those units can often have very powerful weapons mixed into them, things that will just melt, individual models pretty fast. Especially looking at the new rules and the way shooting is going to work, some of these weapons are going to be, very, very devastating things. So having a rule that sort of protects the individual heroes probably makes a lot of sense in a game where, las cannons are sort of handed out to everybody as they go to war. So what's the problem with bringing this rule over into AoS? My argument would be most people want this rule brought over out of sort of a gut reaction. You get your character killed, and your immediate reaction is, ugh, that sucks. I want that to stop. It's a sort of aversion to pain, but then we don't think too much farther beyond that. And when I look at a game design rule, what I think about is, what are the second order and third order consequences? What else does changing this rule do? And the most obvious thing that occurred to me is that if you brought this rule into AoS, you are making Johnny win. So this guy is going to become the king of the ring. And if you ain't playing combos, you ain't playing. And let me see if I can sell you on why I think that is if this rule were brought in wholesale. Even right now, as it stands, most of the very potent armies that are around or have been around or the sort of top of tier 1 are armies that rely on an extreme amount of synergy. Multiple buffs onto Necropolis Knights, making their mortal wounds pop off and restoring their, you can pop whole snakes back onto the table quite easily, made them very frightening. The bloodletter bombs, where you're getting them to mortal wound on a 4-up and then blowing the whole unit across the table with Sail, right? So relying on things like the Blood Secretor and Sail the Faithless. The Skyfires even in base, relying on, their shamans floating around behind them, giving them the extra bonus to mortal wounds. Conan Rux and the Savage Orc boss. I can probably go on and on. I mean, there are a ton of these. But the key with them is you'll notice in almost all those cases, what was holding that combo together was usually a pretty fragile hero who, if you have some amount of shooting or can get into the right place to target them, you could remove them and sort of break the combo. And it keeps these things in check to a degree. Now, look, these are all still very powerful armies that have been at top tables. So the idea that even what we have now can truly stop these combos, I find questionable at best. Okay. But once you introduce this rule and you say heroes can't be targeted, these combos become unbreakable. Because the only way I stop the bloodletter bomb is to hope for the top of one and kill 20 or 30 bloodletters before my opponent goes. Which may happen or may not. I may have an army that can one drop and go fast enough and do that kind of thing, but it may not. I may not have the shooting enough to kill 30 bloodletters. I might have enough shooting in Magic to bring down a 5 wound hero, but I may not have enough to bring down 30 wounds worth of bloodletters. Or it gets worse if we get into other, some of these other examples. Some where the core troops themselves are tougher or harder to kill. You look at something like a Ruck and Savage Orcs. I mean, that's 80 wounds of orc meat sitting there. I don't think you're going to kill your way through that, not at least in any hyperly expedient way without getting across the table. So you're going to be eating that mass of fire, 120, 160 shots. So it removes the ability to react to the combos. I think about this in terms of Magic. Like that's also the reason I used Johnny here, because combos are a big thing in Magic, but they're certainly not always dominant. It's sort of it comes and goes how powerful combos become. And the key with it is always that there's ways to stop the combos by removing the critical component, right? Whether that be through counter magic or direct damage to a creature on the table or something like that. It's very rare that you see them put something that can't be countered, that can't be targeted as part of a combo, because that makes the combo fairly unbreakable and highly dangerous. So the potential consequences I see of this, and these are just my own thoughts, are that one, infantry units would always get taken at the maximum size, because if I know the only way you can break my combo is to kill my unit, I'm just going to always dial that up to the maximum number, because I'm going to want to have the maximum shield for my combo. It could lead to the return of the bunker unit, a thing that I always hated so much in previous editions. The idea that you take a small cadre of troops whose literal only job is to sit around at the back and be a bodyguard for the heroes. They don't do anything. They don't fight. They're not there for any purpose other than to be 20 extra wounds or 40 extra wounds for the heroes. And of course, what you would do is, within whatever army you're building, you would find the cheapest mass of warm bodies you can find and just basically have one of them standing in front of the hero and snake the rest around behind, and the hero walks up within synergy range behind the units he's buffing, as previously happened, and then I would just pull all my casualties off the back if you bothered to target my bunker unit. Okay. It would and the real killer to this is it would actually lessen the number of competitive lists. Because when you have a strong ascendancy of one particular type of playstyle, that means that other playstyles go away. And the number of competitive lists would probably shrink to those that have these extremely powerful combos, especially as we'll certainly see more combinations in the future. I mean, synergy is simply an important part of this game. It's what makes things kind of interesting, is when you get units working together. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's actually a great strength. But of course, that synergy has to be somewhat fragile. I mean, it doesn't need to be broken at a whim, but it needs to be able to be stopped, right? That sort of is the nature of the game. If these combos become extremely hard to stop and these lists rise, then the number of competitive lists shrinks, because if you're not running one of those combos, you lose, right? And those forces, those sub-factions, those armies, those whatever that can generate extremely powerful combos basically rule the day. And if you're not in a force that can generate some incredibly synergistic combo, you just lose, almost out of hand, because you don't have the ability to stop the other player's superior combo anymore. And that's a problem for me. So that's why I don't like the rule coming into Age of Sigmar part and parcel and wholesale. a game that does by its nature have less shooting, and is more focused on close combat and that sort of thing. Um, so I think there are other ways we can solve this, and I'm guessing as you're watching this, if you are a big fan of this rule, or if character sniping really really bothers you, you might be very angry at me right now, and yelling at your computer, and I don't want that. But don't worry, I do have some other thoughts. So the to me the problem with the rule is its carte blanche nature. Okay, the fact that it has a complete finality to it. So, but there are other options. So let's talk about some alternatives. My answer is don't use a chainsaw when what we need is a scalpel. Full credit to Charlie Banks, who commented on a previous video and left that exact quote, which I love, 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 love. We need a just right solution, right? And to me, the just right solution is we need to stop thinking about like always changing the core rules in response to certain problems. We have a huge suite of uh, abilities and of ways that we can react to problems in the game. Because here's the thing: I agree that character sniping is a problem. I don't disagree with that point. I just disagree with the solution of bringing this rule in. So here are some other options that are more targeted. We could update some war scrolls of fragile heroes to act more like the necromancer, where if they're near a certain type of model on a 4 or 5 plus, that damage they take gets moved to a nearby unit. It actually makes the necromancer, who is just a normal dude in a t-shirt save most of the time, pretty tough, because something like half, a third of his wounds, whatever the case, go over to that other unit. It's sort of the old school. There was a time where sort of tomb heralds and stuff could absorb on a particular role. The second option is we could create a targeted bodyguard ability. I don't mean a generic ability that gets printed on things. I mean we add to certain war scrolls a bodyguard-esque ability, the whole text, where we say some units can protect a very specific hero who is nearby. My biggest fear is the opening up of this to say any character plus any unit equals immortal character. That's also not narrative because you can have really weird combinations hanging out together and getting this protection. But if you told me that, like the bloodletters protecting Sail the Faithless, for example, but if you told me that the bloodletter hero, like who the bloodletter herald, who basically just looks like another bloodletter, gets this ability when he's near bloodletters, I'd be like, okay, no, that makes sense. Or an empire captain or something, when he's walking around near Free Company or state militia. Sure, okay, cool. I have no problem with that. And we've already shown that we can update abilities on War Scrolls. They've done it many times. So there's nothing impossible about this. And in this way, we would have very sort of specific combinations that would allow for particular fragile heroes, even those who might be synergistic, to be protected. Because it's relevant, it makes sense in terms of what that is trying to accomplish, both in the sort of verisimilitude of the world and in the larger game structure of what's going on. We could also create battalions, allegiance abilities, command abilities, sort of similar things across the army that can afford some measure of protection to particular heroes. Again, we could be very targeted about this. We could say this hero in this battalion, when he's within range of troops in the battalion, gains something, or there could be a command or allegiance ability or something you select that allows your heroes some measure of protection. And finally, we could use some combination of all the above. It could be they can protect a specific hero on a roll of plus, or it could be a battalion that gives the unit this sort of bodyguard ability on a roll of this plus, right? And I'm fine with all of that, because then it's more targeted. We're not just sort of bathing the whole game in a brand new rule set and just saying, let the chips fall where they may. Because when you make huge shifts like that, the consequences tend to be quite large. Whereas I do think this is a problem, but I think in the solution we need to be a little more nuanced with it, and maybe we do it a little more slowly, and maybe we do sort of test it over time and see what happens, which I'm also okay with, because I would rather have a little longer of character sniping being a thing or not quite being stopped exactly what we want than a massive rule changing the entire way that the game is played and leading to the ascendancy of certain armies. If you're very small and light touch with your changes, yeah, you can still have very big effects, but you also might just have some very small targeted effects that that slowly push the meta and the way the game is played the way you want, and you can sort of let that evolve over time. So those are my ideas, and I like all of those. I would love to see many of these things come in. The Necromancer ability is so cool, and there are plenty of other troops for which something like that makes sense. I would love to see this sort of thing implemented. And I think it's a great way to deal with character sniping, especially for those particular heroes. I can see plenty of Skaven having this ability. Let me just say that. Like, if you think that warlord isn't throwing a clan rat in front of that arrow coming his way, well, you know. So there we go. Those are my thoughts. But as I said, I definitely want to hear yours. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like if you liked it, subscribe for more game design, hobby cheating, and everything else in the future. As I said, these are just my own opinions, my own thoughts. I certainly welcome all the discussion down below. Do you think character sniping is a problem, and if so, how would you want to solve it? I look forward to all the good discussion. There's been so much good discussion so far, and everybody's remained very civil and had lots of good ideas, and it's what inspired me to do this video. So thank you all very much. Look forward to your comments. See you next time.